What I'm looking forward to on this, as we do the tick down as people start coming in, what I'm really looking forward to going forward is, of course, when everyone does what, the bad version of what Elon Musk has done to his own child and dead names his website.
Yeah.
It's the only time that I will approve of dead naming is, referring to Elon's site as Twitter and not the stupid X thing. What do you? I saw a thing. What are you supposed to call them now? They're not tweets. They're
like Zeets or whatever. Or
Zeets.
I guess that's how you pronounce it.
It's not going to work. Why would you buy a large brand only to remove all brand capital from it and change it into something completely different? That's stupid.
Let's just destroy that entire
platform. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Extra Shift. I'm Chris here, as always, with Brendon. How we going?
Pretty good. Yeah, it's been a little bit. It's been a busy little while, unfortunately. Not for the NHL, but for me personally.
Yeah, we were all ready to record last Wednesday. We were ready.
Yeah, I had like one day free last week, and then it was just like nope. Suddenly, no days free.
And then I was not on the mainland for a couple of days, and trust me, I have my other big podcast that I do. And I was supposed to record an episode of that over the weekend from Tasmania and could not get enough reception to do it.
That sounds about right for Tasmania, yeah.
Utterly impossible. There was a great sign at the airport as I went in that was Optus going, Tasmania, we've got you covered. Lies. Absolutely.
I mean, Telstra's like really your only option there for stuff. Yep. And even then, like, it's still pretty patchy.
Yeah, it did confirm to me I'm going to move away from I was always going to move away from Optus anyway, but I'm moving to something on a Telstra network because I got to Tasmania and had zero reception. And again, I was supposed to be doing a whole podcast for my other Bake Off related podcast. And not to say more successful, but I mean, it is.
Yeah.
But that one's big. But I was supposed to be doing that.
I got to say, what do you think? Like, do you think that there's a bigger fan base for Bake Off than there is for the NHL?
Judging by the ratings of Bake Off, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty good chance of that.
And look, here's the really interesting part for me from a personal standpoint is that I've got a bigger imprint in Canada off the back of Bake Off.
Yeah.
Like seriously, like I've got contacts in Canada. I'm not bragging about this randomly on the podcast, guys. I literally have contacts at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So, Bake Off is like I'd probably suggest it's much bigger. Bake Off is far bigger in Australia than hockey.
Well, either way, we are here recording the Extra Shift. It is episode 193, and we're plugging along with these numbers. We're getting closer and closer to 200. I reckon we probably hit 200 around about the start of the next season.
Ideally, I'd like our big season preview where we put all of our predictions in. I'd love that to be 200.
That would be handy. I think
that would be handy, which just means a couple of little smaller. And we've got some great off-season content coming your way, so we might have some smaller ones, but which will fill the gaps and get us to that. So 200 is the big preseason extravaganza. So I'm looking forward to that. So.
But obviously, there's some notable 93s. There's a guy named Doug Gilmour, Ryan Hopkins, so forth. DeBrincat is the interesting one in that list on his new team, but we will talk about that shortly. There's some other pressing news in the meantime.
I mean, look, the other important point to really note here is that, we were talking about this. There are some 93s of note. I mean, I call lies. There's no 93s of note in any way, shape, or form. No one has ever worn 93 with any distinction. It's code for San Jose hasn't had one. So at some point, someone will wear it for San Jose, and then and only then will there be a true master of the 93. But yes, obviously we're going to sort of get into it pretty quickly today because a couple of big bits of news dropped today. Yeah. So not recording last week actually sort of had some benefits for us in terms of that. Now, also before we start, we did say we'd talk a bit more about what was happening with the Women's League in this podcast, but nothing has happened.
Yeah,
they went
been a quiet week since we last.
They went radio silent on what the deal is, apart from the fact that everybody in one league is very upset and everyone in the other league is very happy, and that's all we know. So we will do something in the off season. I think, look, one of the things we're going to do probably in the off season is a full women's hockey podcast, and go through what's happening in the women's game because there is a lot to update. But at the moment, it's dead.
Yeah.
So what we're going to start with instead,
until we know more.
Yeah, so we're going to start instead with probably the biggest news, and I do say that with great respect to Blackhawks fans, because the biggest news of the day is the retirement officially of Patrice Bergeron. 38, just a few months after winning the Selkie for a record sixth time. I don't know what we're going to do in our preseason predictions, because that's now one we've got to think about.
That was the tap-in. Like, that was every year was just like, oh, well, Selkie, Bergeron. All right, I've ticked up one on my tally for the predictions for the year.
Did we do our full recap, by the way, of our all of our predictions?
We went through some of them, but
I don't think we finished after the cup.
I don't think we did like a full thing. So maybe we can do that sometime soon. Like, we talked about how terrible some of them aged.
Because Patrice Bergeron was an absolute tap-in the whole way through.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, honestly, before we talk about his career, even regardless of like the injury problems and the stuff that plagued him in the end of last season and so forth, like, under the hood, just still an incredible player at 38 years old. Still one of the best impact players in the game in terms of his two-way center role. Arguably the best at that in the last decade, and still really good. Like, the real interesting thing is, like, I feel like he could have continued to be like a very productive NHLer for another 4 or 5 years, but I don't know if it's just at this point in time it's just too painful for him to play or whatever.
He wasn't originally. He was kind of not coming back this year, and like they really had to work on him to convince him to come back again and give it one more run with this group, because he was like they basically, the stuff they were talking about last year was he was broken really badly, and they were worried about his health. He wanted to get out while he could still like do things and was still normal. I think it's fair to say that he's the only Bruin that pretty much every fan base likes.
Oh yeah,
like,
absolutely.
He's literally the only Bruin I can stand.
No one's got a bad thing to say about Patrice Bergeron.
No, he's literally the only Bruin I can stand. And 19 seasons, bits and pieces of it, everything with the Bruins. I like
Pasternak too. I don't want to slander Pasternak.
No, I'll slander Pasternak. He's playing for the love of the sport.
Yeah.
427 goals, 613 assists in 1,294 career games, one Stanley Cup, which apparently, after Pete Blackburn put that out there, he got absolutely savaged by people saying, "What do you mean you only put down he won one?" Because it's literally the statistic, he won one. And I'm saying he probably should have won more. And it's not his fault they didn't win more. It goes to show the league. No, how dare you? You slandered
Patrice his name.
And Pete's literally going, but he did.
It's a fact.
It's a fact. He got one, which is more than a lot of players get. Ask Joe Thornton if he'd like to swap careers. He'd swap. But I think what I loved, and before we get into some of the other stuff here, the comments on this were great, because it started with, there's an obvious one that it started with, which is, why is it still called the Selkie? The first thing they should do is rename the Selkie to Bergeron. And first of all, I am in favor of that one, and we'll talk about awards. We'll talk about the renaming. But then I loved, there were other people who then got really into the spirit of it, were like, tear TD Gardens down and build a brand new building which is honoring his legacy instead of that garbage fire of everything that's going on in TD Gardens. Forget leaving him in the front office of the Bruins. Send him to the head office of the NHL to kick Gary out the door and take over the league. It's just, and look, the one, and it will link into a story that we're going to talk about in a minute. One of the things for me that indicates what sort of a person Patrice Bergeron is after the Kyle Beach allegations came out, and he did the interview. Bergeron sat the entire Bruins team down, put the interview on, and then had a full team conversation about supporting people, giving people an inclusive voice, making sure the room was an inclusive voice. And look, one of the things you have to give the Bruins, especially with Bergeron there, is for all of the people hating them and they're being a bit of the assholes of the league and stuff like that, they were one of the teams this year. There was no question on pride. There was none. They just locked in and went, no, we're doing this. And Bergeron is really, in that regard, he's very much a leader of men.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there hasn't been a lot of great examples in the last little while of players in the NHL whose reputation of being sterling captains has really held up. But Bergeron's one of those guys that there's just as far as I'm aware of, maybe there's something that I'm unaware of, but I haven't seen a tarnish on his
No.
on or off ice stuff. I know that you sent this to me as well, but I know we've both seen this tweet from Jay Fresh that or whatever the fuck we're supposed to call tweets now.
It's a tweet.
Yeah, it's a tweet. So from 2011 to 2023, in a span of 12 seasons, there were 1,941 Selke Trophy ballots were submitted. 1,785 of them, which is 92%, included Patrice Bergeron in the last 12 seasons. 937 of them had Bergeron in first place, which is 48%. So in the last 12 years, he received 48% of all first place
votes. He received a vote on 92% of ballots in 12 years.
Yeah, you can't tell
mental.
Me, I mean, obviously a first ballot Hall of Famer, but you can't tell me that he doesn't exemplify that position and that, realistically the Selke Award, as quickly as tomorrow should be renamed the Bergeron.
And if it wasn't for his injuries in 2021, like his 2021, there were 100 ballots. He got 89 votes and 15 first place votes, which was his lowest number by an absolute mile. Yeah. If he had actually not been injured, he would have done even better then. And like 2020 again, he had a slight dip. He got 12% of the votes, first place votes in 2020. So the COVID shortened seasons and injuries probably stopped that percentage from being closer to like a 95 or a 96 and stopped him getting over 50% of the first place votes. That's madness.
It's nuts, honestly. Just an absolute masterclass in that, in terms of like, offensive and defensive impact. But I think he averages out to only be something like a 66 point a season kind of player, whatever. But to be that and also like the best defensive center in the league for the entire time is just like an incredible achievement.
Like if you look at all of his charts and you look at his, what his impact is on ice, look at his WAR. And what he sort of does in terms of, what he adds or takes away from a team in terms of goals. Even though he's only scoring that like 66 really a season in terms of points, what he's stopping makes up the deficit quite a lot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing. Now, I think it's really interesting. I think that the conversation around the Bruins is a really interesting conversation that needs to be had. We were talking about it a couple of weeks ago. The Bruins have had the worst offseason possible. And I think it probably was... They kind of knew this was coming, though, because they delayed it for 12 months. They delayed it for 12 months to try to put themselves in a better spot.
They had one last swing at it, and honestly, it looked like it was going to happen. Like, they had a record-breaking regular season, and it all obviously fell apart in the playoffs, as happens sometimes. But, look, they knew the pain was coming at some point in time. They even talked about this. Do you remember in the bubble when they got knocked out, there was like interviews with like Marchand and Bergeron and a few of the other guys, and they were, almost in tears, basically. Like they thought that was pretty much it. Like, I think that they were talking about at that point that this was the end of their dynasty. Like this was the end of this run of the team, this cause final. And they managed to get like a couple more swings at it after that. Obviously it didn't work out, but the writing's been on the wall for a while, as it is for, most of these, great players from the last decade, that their time is very soon coming to a close. And it's unfortunate that Bergeron has kind of gone out when probably he could still, play at a level. But whether or not that comes at personal pain to him or discomfort or whatever, is another question. Obviously, he's decided that that's it for him.
Yeah, I think it's the Bruins are they're in a really weird spot now in terms of moving forward. Like, so this is the off season they've had. Just to give you an idea of what's going on with the Bruins. This season they've lost all of Bertuzzi, Hathaway, Foligno, Hall, Nosek, Clifton, and now obviously Bergeron.
Yeah.
They've added James Van Riemsdyk, Milan Lucic, Morgan Geekie, Patrick Brown, Kevin Shattenkirk, and Jason Menga. I mean, really, seriously, like what they've added there is not their first line at the moment. If you were like, there was a tweet where they were putting together. Again, I'm still calling them tweets. Tweet where they were putting together what their current lines are going to be. The top line at the moment looks like it's Marchand, Zucker, Pasternak. Right, JVR, Coyle, and DeBrusque on a second line. Like,
I mean, obviously, we knew when the Pasternak extension was going to come in that was going to, cause
but that's
that's
the other thing. When they took the one last swing at it and delayed it for 12 months, they were still, I think, hoping that Pasternak was going to take a massive discount.
Yeah,
and he didn't, and which he shouldn't have. And we said that straight up. He should never have taken the massive discount. He deserves to be paid, and. And the other interesting part about this too is that this lineup they put together still has Ullmark and Swayman in net, and that's not going to be a thing come to the season. You think? I don't expect that to be a thing. So, and the defense on the Bruins looks absolutely horrible. So, I think a lot of people last season predicted the Bruins' misfortune, and then they proved the doubters wrong. I think a lot of people are going to predict a massive fall off for the Bruins this season, and we'll see what happens.
I don't think they're probably going to be as bad as people expect necessarily. Like, I don't think that they're a guaranteed playoff team or anything.
My thing is not so much they're going to have a massive fall off and come last, but my thing is I think there are a lot of teams around them getting better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can absolutely categorically say the Bruins have gotten worse, and I don't mean from they were first in the league and they're going to come third in the league. Yeah. I think if you have them where they were last year and where people thought they'd be, which was around that second, third in the division mark, I think they are worse than that team was projected to be. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Is that everyone's got that.
Obviously, so many teams in the East are on the way up, and it's just going to be, it was always going to be difficult.
I mean, look, I'm also going to say straight up that I think, and this is going to be a preview of my preview that'll happen later on, I think the Leafs are going to have a massive slide this year too, but that's just me in terms of roster construction. I don't see it at the moment. So, but back to Bergeron before we finish up. The jokes around renaming the Selke the Bergeron, I don't think they should be jokes. I think they're actually something the league should consider. So, to people who don't know, anything about the Selke, the person the trophy is named after, Selke was actually the assistant. One of the assistants to Conn Smythe, who had a falling out with Conn Smythe over trading a player who, by the way, Conn Smythe was happy with the trade at the end, but liked the player that got traded. And so threw a mini tantrum. They had a fight. He then left the Leafs and went to the Habs, won a couple of cups in the early 1960s and then retired by 1964. So we're giving a lot of these awards. The naming of the NHL awards has been an interesting conversation piece. No, you don't need to upgrade them for every generation. However, some of them make sense. The Rocket Richard makes perfect sense. All right. I don't think anyone will question the naming of the Rocket Richard. The Masterton doesn't count because obviously that's a specific award for a specific purpose. Even technically the Conn Smythe, you can go, okay. But I think like the Conn Smythe should probably actually be the award for Coach of the Year. That would make more sense.
Yeah,
just going to put that out there. But or even General Manager of the Year should be Conn Smythe. Who the hell knows? But that's what it should be. Bergeron is one of the few players that I would go 100% should have the award named after him. Best defensive forward. It's got to be. And I don't see why we should just keep the names of awards for people who are staff members under Conn Smythe.
I mean, I'm definitely not, suggesting that every, award needs to get updated or that we need to do this semi-regularly or anything like that. But
there's some that just feel like, if we've just named them after the members of Conn Smythe's extended fans or friends, I think we can move those ones on and maybe have something that's a bit more pertinent. Like people only know the Selke for Bergeron.
Yeah.
Like, a large percentage of hockey fans today only know what the Selke is because, that's that thing that Patrice Bergeron wins every year.
Yeah. And it's a big story when someone else wins it. Like
exactly. And again, like along those lines, it's like, the weirdness that is the NHL. Mark Messier has an award named after him. Wayne Gretzky does not.
Yeah, that's that's a pretty glaring kind of.
And that's also a weird award because that's a weird award in terms of Mark just picks someone he likes.
Yes, it's very much like I've decided who I'm going to announce that I like, and
Mark Messier Award for leadership
cool.
is the Mark Messier Award for leadership is I like that captain.
Yeah.
That's literally it's a whim.
Yeah,
it's a Mark Messier
it's a
whim.
one-person voting committee, and it's Mark. That's
and as we know, Mark Messier has whims. He's very much prone to those. If you've watched any of the panels this year, Mark Messier is not great with his hockey opinions. And Wayne Gretzky, surprisingly, very good analyst.
Yes.
So yeah, look, I think there are a couple of awards, but I think the first one is you've got to start with the Selkie, and you've got to rename it after Patrice Bergeron. I think it's fair. I think it's something. Even if you want to name it the Selkie Bergeron and like hyphenate the damn thing, I don't care.
Yeah, I think it's probably. I don't think it's a bad thing to think about these things. Not so much as like, oh well, we're taking this away from Frank Selke or whatever, but it's not the worst thing to say. Like you have a 20-year period where this was named after you or whatever.
I assume they're waiting for Don Cherry to die. Just because he'll get on his podcast. I'm still amazed that Grapes knows what a podcast is.
Yeah.
Although
it's not like he's sitting there cutting it together.
No, but it is what he does best. We're just sitting in a microphone ranting and raving like a crazy person. So I'm surprised, to be honest with you. I'm surprised Barstool didn't snap him up. But anyway, there's my shout out Barstool for the day. Take that. Take that, spitting chicklets. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. There is no segue into the next bit. So Blackhawks chairman Rocky Wirtz passes away at age 70. The statement said that he passed away today at North Shore Evanston Hospital following a brief illness while surrounded by his wife and 4 children, including Danny. He was the principal owner and chairman of the Blackhawks since 2007, oversaw the 3 Chicago Cup wins, but also oversaw the cover-up of sexual assault of Kyle Beach and the subsequent handling of the matter when it became public. Of course, making the statement of that's in the past, we're not talking about that now, when he was quizzed about it. Despite the fact that Danny, his son, who had been handling it, was addressing it and talking about the things they were doing to move forward as an organization, and he very hardcore just went, don't care. Mark Spector, I thought, had a really interesting take on this. He was like, look, he said several things can be true. There are people who are going to be very upset who knew Rocky Wirtz well and worked with him. I'd interviewed him a bunch of times. When I'd worked with him and interviewed him and spoken to him in a hockey context, I'd always found him to be, a bit ornery, but fine to deal with, pleasant enough. He did a lot for the organization. He very much, restored the organization in terms of where it felt it should be. But you also have to acknowledge that the way that the organization was run, especially around the Kyle Beach stuff, was not okay.
No.
And that there can be two things that can be true. People can be incredibly sad and, obviously, mourn his passing and appreciate things that he did for hockey, but at the same time, acknowledge the damage that some of those things also caused.
It's a stain. I mean, if nothing else, it's a stain on that legacy for sure.
But I think that it'll be interesting to see for the Blackhawks from here. You assume Danny Wirtz will take control. He was next in line, really, so you'd assume Danny Wirtz will take control. People who have worked closely with Danny over the years have suggested that he is a lot more forward-thinking than his father, and is prepared to sort of try to take the organization in different directions. So we'll see what happens with that. But obviously, that was obviously rather big news today as well. So not much more to add on that one because, again, if Pete Blackburn adding a context of Bergeron won 1 Stanley Cup got him absolutely flamed and trolled, saying anything about Rocky Wirtz right now will probably get you the same thing. So trades. We have a trade to announce. I think you're going to want to hear it. We didn't even hear that once in the draft, by the way. Can I say how disappointed I was?
I know, that was a real.
I was ready for it.
Yeah.
The Detroit Red Wings receive Alex DeBrincat, who was extended at 4 years at 7.875 from the Ottawa Senators for Dominic Kubalik, Donovan Sabrango, a 2024 conditional first and a 2024 fourth. This is a really interesting move for both parties.
So before we get too much into it, the condition is that Detroit has the option to send either their own or Boston's 2024 first round pick. In the event that the Boston pick is their top round selection, they can keep it and then transfer it to a 2025 pick. So it's basically just top 10 protection for the pick.
So this is a weird one for me. The Senators were in a situation. DeBrincat was not going to extend in Ottawa. He'd kind of made that clear internally. They were nowhere close. Detroit going in for him, I don't know, because I feel like a lot of Detroit fans feel like this is one of those big, it's going to kick us over the top moves of finally into where we're going to be. I've always sort of been on board with the Isa plan, but it's taken forever. It's not really moving forward in any way, shape, or form. Going for DeBrincat, if that's your big move, I kind of worry a little bit. I don't think it's...
I think a lot of the moves that Yzerman's kind of done in the last little while are kind of, none of them I would say are huge swings. None of them
they're correcting moves.
Yeah, it's a lot of like, taking a shot at this guy, taking a shot at this guy, and it hasn't really necessarily, turned into, anything that you knocked it out of the park for them. And I think that's where some people have started to get concerned about the Isa plan in terms of like they were expecting to be like, a contender by now, not a, potential bubble team that hasn't quite made it and all that kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, look, I like the move for them. I think that there's a lot of upside into DeBrincat in terms of his like goal scoring, in terms of like, this is a piece that they don't really necessarily have in terms of like pure shooting talent. Like the closest they had recently was Perron, who's pretty much a power play specialist shooter. So I think that there's a good chance that DeBrincat could turn back into being a 40 goal guy on Detroit, and I think that's a good thing for them. Does this turn Detroit immediately into a contender or anything? Absolutely not. But no.
I think it's interesting because when you go through and look at that roster, after those years of all of those picks, you would anticipate the roster to be something a little bit more dynamic. Yeah. And it's really not. It's a very middling, and like even when you look at like the prospects that they've got, like everyone thinks about, they're this young up and coming team. They're this young up and the young up and coming team thing is a big part of this conversation that's been going on, right? Dylan Larkin's 26. You don't think about that. Like, I think a lot of people still see Dylan Larkin at like 24, 23, 24. He's 26, turning 27.
Yeah.
Like Dylan Larkin's time is moving the hell on, guys. It's like if you look at the roster now, it's got
and he's not on a cheap deal either. Like he's on
8.7 until the end of time,
which is good. Like this is the start. This is the first year of that deal, which is still I think a good deal for him. But it's not like he's cheap anymore.
I get the feeling for me that Steve Yzerman has got this team for this year, and his eye is on free agency next year because of the cap bump. I get the feeling, everyone has the feeling that next year's free agency is going to be insane because the money's going up by a lot, and a lot of players have timed their contracts to be up in the year that the money goes through the roof. And if you look at what the Red Wings have done, they've got Perron comes off the books, Denny Sprong comes off the books, Christian Fischer comes off the books, Shane Gostisbehere is a 1 year, one more year left. He comes off the books. James Reimer's a 1 year solution.
Sure.
They've basically got a massive amount of space there. Projected at the moment without knowing what that cap is going to be. If you just take the salary cap as being going up to 87, which is what that's the bottom end of what it can be next year is 87. If the bottom end is 87, they've got 33 million in cap space.
Yeah, I think the only glaring things on that, potential is the recent deals that they signed with like Andrew Kopp and with Potentially Ben Sherratt and, kind of some of these guys that they gave money to and term to that, start to look like a little bit of a black mark in terms
Andrew
of
Kopp with a 10.
That was going to work out a lot better.
Andrew Kopp with a 10-team no trade. It's a weird one, that one.
It started, my guess is it kind of started to feel like there was a bit of pressure on we've been rebuilding for a while now. We need to start getting good. And I think that they expected these are moves that you make to push you over the line, and it just didn't really happen for them. And those guys didn't really work out.
I mean, I'm still baffled by trading for Yamamoto and then buying him out. That's thoroughly confusing to me.
Yeah, that's still really weird.
They are a team that could do with Yamamoto.
Yeah, absolutely.
They 100% could do with Kylie Yamamoto. Yeah. Also, they've gone out, they've cut a bunch of now they've made a bunch of moves, they've moved a bunch of players on. Obviously I finally got my man in San Jose. Zadina goes to San Jose after being released, basically. Literally was they went and had a conversation, and rather than go down to the minors and then he asked for a release, and the Red Wings went, sure, we're just going to contract terminate you and
doesn't
release
work
you.
out.
And so Zadina goes to San Jose for a year where he gets to prove it on a team where he's going to be the offense. He'll play off the wing of Thomas Hertl and or Logan Couture, and you want points? Okay. You're it. You are going to be the entirety of the San Jose Sharks offense.
Yeah, it's hard to get a much better.
Ready. Until the rookies are ready,
much better set of minutes and opportunity than that.
So I don't look. I get the move from sort of a longer term basis. My question is, does this change the impetus on Steve Yzerman that he needs to do something big in the next 12 months? I'm not going to say this season.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that the pressure is still on at this point in time. They've been, when did their big playoff streak end? I think it was 2015, 2014, 2015, something like that. It's almost been 10 years now. In a couple of years, it'll be 10 years since that ended and since they were last in the playoffs. And since they were essentially, a competitive team, that's a long time. That's a long, drought. Obviously, Yzerman wasn't there for that whole time. But I think that the expectation is that they've been rebuilding effectively for that long, even though it was difficult to begin with some of the contracts that they had, and that they're expecting to start seeing, results soon. And it's a difficult division to make the playoffs in. They may potentially put up, I don't know about with this roster necessarily, but in the next couple of years, they may put up a result that would have gotten them into the playoffs in a different division. Is that going to be enough? I don't know. Yeah,
I'm still wondering. Yeah, I don't know.
There's still a bit of murky middle for me, I think, because their problem for such a long time was that they couldn't draft high because they were in the middle. And I feel like they didn't maybe drop low enough. They just kind of stayed in the middle there, and they never got their swing at a superstar.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of teams that have suffered from that. Vancouver suffered from just bad lottery luck. Yeah. Arizona's done the same thing, by the way. They've suffered from horrible lottery luck.
Oh yeah, terrible.
They never bottomed out.
No.
And that's one of the things with again, and I'm going to bring up San Jose, obviously, but that's one of the things with San Jose where you talk about the idea of you've got to bottom out. You have to, if you're in the situation that a team like that is, you've got to bottom out.
Yeah, if you want those core guys that you can build a team around for a decade or more, it's so hard to get that if you're not drafting.
And we need to remember, that Ken Holland cleaned the cupboard out, trying to maintain a playoff streak that they should have abandoned once it was very clear that they weren't. They were just trying to maintain the streak at that point in time. And
not that it was a particularly stocked cupboard at that point in time.
No, but he literally emptied everything out, and there was nothing left when Yzerman came in. All right, so some notable signings. Connor Bedard signed his ELC on his 18th birthday.
It's a sweet story.
It is. Ross Colton, 4 years, $4 million in Colorado.
I don't like that. I don't like that one.
Colorado have made some very weird moves since they won the Cup. That's one of them.
I mean, it's weird too because it's not even here's your reward after the case, because Ross Colton wasn't on that team when they won the Cup.
No. Alex Newhook, 4 years at $2.9 million in Montreal. We talked about that when the whole trade thing went down. That feels like Montreal is absolutely gambling that Newhook is going to do more than everybody thinks he will.
Well, I don't think that's a bad number for him necessarily.
I don't think it's a bad number for him,
especially
but
with
they
the
are
cap coming up
gambling.
and everything. No, I mean, I think that's actually a pretty cheap deal, realistically, for a 23, 24-year-old player. I think that if he turns out to be a third liner, which there's the chance that that's what it is, that's totally fine.
Yeah. Condre Miller, 2 years at 3,872 in New York. That's a good. It's a
real good cheap deal, but it does obviously kick the can down the line.
It walks him.
I wouldn't have been shocked if he got double that. I wouldn't have been shocked if he got double.
Yeah, walks into free agency. As I mentioned before, Philip Zadina, 1 year at 1.1 in San Jose. That just fulfills my draft ambitions of finally the San Jose Sharks land Philip Zadina. I was people who were around during that draft.
Yes.
I was desperate for San Jose to get Zadina. I was all aboard the Zadina train, and we got nowhere near it. Anze Kopitar, 2 years at $7 million in LA. That's a bit of a sweetheart deal there from Kopitar to sort of give them some cap space to do some stuff. And Ilya Samsonov. Now, this was for me, obviously, this is going to lead into a couple of unresolved situations. This went to arbitration, and Toronto came out with the brilliantly warm and fuzzy announcement of his re-signing of the arbitrator has awarded Ilya Samsonov $3.55 million for. That's just look
heartfelt.
Dangle said it in his, but it's so true. Arbitration is the most messed up thing in the league because you can be fantastic for a team. We love you. We're in the organization. You go into arbitration and they pull all this stuff out to go, actually, he's a bit shit.
Yeah.
He's not really as good as he thinks he is.
It's a brutal process, I think.
And then once you sign that, once you get that arbitration deal, you walk back out the door and like, so pleased to have you.
So happy
you're
here.
great.
Happy
you're great.
You've got to try and build that relationship back.
Aren't you wonderful? As was pointed out, Dangle's reaction to that, as he pointed out, very few players who get awarded an amount of money in arbitration stick around past that year. Yeah. And probably this is Samsonov's last year in Toronto when he's probably gone into the year.
That was probably realistically always the case with their position, but
well, that's next year when they use all of the extra cap space they have on Connor Hellebuck for no apparent reason, because the media tells them to sign him. So that leads into an unresolved situation, which is that Toronto is currently $12.38 million over the cap. Now, even if they buy out Matt Murray. And there is a buyout. I think tomorrow is the next buyout comes up. It's tomorrow or
pretty
Thursday.
Soon, I think, at least.
But even if they were to buy out Matt Murray, and even if they were to decide to put Jake Muzzin onto LTIR, they are still over the cap. And they haven't done anything with the Nylander deal. Toronto's in deep shit.
Yeah.
Like, they are really in a bad spot. And I was on record when the general manager move happened that I didn't necessarily think that Toronto were bringing the right general manager in. He's got a lot of problems to fix up. By the way, that wasn't his strength. That was not his strength in Calgary. And now Nylander obviously has this season left, but you don't want to get to a season next year where Austin Matthews, William Nylander are both up with Tyler Bertuzzi, Max Domi, Sam Lafferty, all of these people coming up at the same time. I know it's a big cap jump next year, but if they don't get, especially look, you get the feeling the Matthews deal will happen.
Yeah.
All indications are that's happening. If they don't get Nylander on a contract, they've got to move him. Because if you don't think William Nylander is walking to the free market next year when the cap goes through the roof and goes, hi, everybody.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I mean, look, any of those guys, I think that the situation exists with any of that core. Like, this is the, I guess the big question for a while has been when is the party over? When does the ball drop for that, for that core? Can they continue to? I think that there was always a chance that they could have continued to keep them if they'd had some success and those guys decided that this was the best for their career if they stuck around and took a bit less and all this kind of stuff. But I don't see, I don't blame any of them for trying to get the best
No.
that they can get in the situation that they're in. Like,
You know
what's any of them? What's Toronto or the media
And
or the team or anything done for any of these guys?
and I've heard a lot of people starting to do the whole, oh, well, if Dubas hadn't have signed Matt Murray to that ridiculous contract, you know what else you didn't need to do? When you're already over the cap and struggling for cap space, you didn't need to sign John Klingberg for $4.1 million.
Yeah.
You did not need to do that. That was not a move that had to happen on any circumstance. Right?
No.
You know what? If you were going to sign John Klingberg, you know who you could have signed for far cheaper than that? You could have signed Justin Hall. Now, I know that the fan base would have rioted, but statistically last year, who had a better year? And everyone talks about, oh, yeah, but Klingberg was on the Ducks only for the first half of the season. In the second half of the season, he was in a team that made the playoffs, and he was terrible.
I mean, look, I think that, Klingberg it's interesting because I think he's just kind of more of what they already have. Like,
and they've been suggesting buying out TJ Brody. TJ Brody was perfectly fine. Like, they're broken.
Yeah, look,
they're a broken fan base.
I think that the reality here is that, if they end up having to move one of these guys, the decision will have essentially been in the end, for bringing in these new guys like Bertuzzi and Klingberg and Domi over keeping one of those old guys, which may or may not work out for them. It's really a question. I don't like it from a asset perspective, from the likelihood that those guys end up being cheaper or stick around or have a better impact than any of those core guys that they drafted. I don't think that the chances of that are very high.
I still think
at this point in time, like, I think that they've kind of just hit fantasy GM mode on the Maple Leafs. Like, shit hasn't worked for them for this long, and they've just kind of gone, well, fuck it, we're just going to make some changes for the sake of making changes.
I kind of also feel, we talked about this on the last podcast, I feel like there are going to be a lot of people in Toronto who are going to be disappointed when they see Max Domi and Tyler Bertuzzi on the ice. Because, again, as I said in the last podcast, I think there are a lot of people that think they've signed their fathers. And they are not their fathers under any circumstances.
I mean, they're both good players.
They're good players. But I mean in terms of they think they've signed bruisers. They've signed assholes. They've signed assholes. They've signed assholes. But Tyler Bertuzzi and Max Domi they're low key assholes. They'll be just annoying. But they are not going to go out there and hit the hell out of people. Max Domi's hit. If you go and look at his stats on hits, he's not a hitter. He does not hit you.
So let me ask you, what's the funnier option? Whether this all just totally fall, like, if let's say that they trade like William Nylander or Mitch Marner or someone in the next little while, whatever, some part of that core, they go out, they just have an awful year with all of these new guys. They're a complete mess, and they don't, and they either don't make the playoffs or get real close to it or whatever. Or would the funnier thing be if for some reason there's this breath of fresh air, even if they're not actually better in the regular season, that they actually do well in the playoffs, and everyone just chalks it all up to these guys that do fucking nothing, like Ryan Reeves?
No, because I think the problem is if they go through and have one of those, if they do a Montreal, which is everybody falls over in front of them. And I know there are Habs fans out there screaming at me right now, bring it on. They all fell over in front of you. That's what happened, right? If they all fall over in front of the Toronto Maple Leafs, teams are going to go out and sign Ryan Reeves type players for the next 15 years, even though he will have done nothing. It's the worst possible
thing that could happen for the sport.
Even though he will have done nothing to contribute it, all someone needs to say is, but he was great in the locker room.
Yeah, that's it.
Because you can't disprove it. Right?
No,
you can't statistically disprove that Ryan Reeves.
The thing is, he is really, like, he's a real fun guy, and he does cool clips or whatever. He plays basketball with Phil Kessel, all this kind of shit or whatever. But anyone can do that. Anyone can do that, and there's a lot of guys that are better players.
Speaking of that, who everyone loves off the ice? Phil Kessel.
Yeah,
they love him. Like, Sidney Crosby waxes lyrical about Phil Kessel. There are songs and sonnets written about Phil Kessel as a great person and a fun teammate to play with. But guess
he's
what?
Still unsigned at the moment.
Yeah, he's still working out a team. Like, come on, come to San Jose. Come, we've got good food. Good golf courses. Really good golf courses in California. You can come over and play some good golf. Speaking of unresolved situations, Connor Hellebuck is still in Winnipeg.
I'm not
I don't think he's
surprised,
going.
honestly. No, I don't think
he's
either.
going.
I was never convinced that was necessarily going to happen, just because of the difficulty of making, that. Like, I think especially, especially too, like, partially it's cap space, but also, like, if you look at it in the past few years, there's been very few significant goalie trades, and even fewer that actually get moved for, like, real assets. Like, for the most part, it's just like a piddly, like, you get a third or whatever, because we've just got no other option and we've got to get rid of this guy.
So I don't think there's a team that can really afford him.
No. As much as some of the teams could have used him, I don't think anyone realistically could have afforded him, and I don't think Winnipeg was going to get what they wanted.
The only team that I would look at that has some cap space that I think could actually benefit from him, first of all, has too many players on its roster to start with. It's Buffalo. And they've got their goalie of the future, Atsuko-Pekka Luukkonen, and he's next. Eric Comrie at the moment is the two option there. Ironically enough, a former Winnipeg Jet. They would be the only team, but they've got to lose players to start with. They're over. So they've got to shed some people. And I don't know if he'd go to Buffalo. I don't think he considered them to be enough of a contender. I think he only wants to go to an absolute top contender, which means he's not going anywhere.
No.
The other player,
none of those guys are in a position that they could add him.
Yeah, the other player who is still where they were, Erik Karlsson. Now, the Karlsson one's interesting. He gave an interview where he said absolutely nothing new, and it was taken by media outlets as being really new. They said about, do you see yourself staying in San Jose for the length of your contract? And he said, no, I'm not. He was back in Sweden. And he's like, no, everyone knows I want to win, and blah, 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 blah. And like, there were people reporting this was brand new news, and everyone's like, no, the Sharks know.
That's
like,
the point.
They're working.
Why they want to move him.
The fact that he said, I've spoken to, and he listed the teams that he's spoken to.
Yeah,
now, he hasn't had those conversations without the Sharks saying, go talk.
So it was Pittsburgh, Carolina, Toronto, and what was the other one?
Oh, who was the other one? I can't remember what the other one was. But basically, it's Pittsburgh, Carolina. It's basically Pittsburgh, Carolina, and Toronto. That's the three options at the moment. Now,
Seattle was the other one.
Seattle was the other one. Of those, the three, because I don't think Seattle's really in the running for it.
No.
The Pittsburgh link won't die.
Yeah.
Now, the only problem with this is working out what the hell a trade looks like.
And I think that's the case with all of those locations.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dumbest place, and I've said this before, I think the dumbest place for Karlsson to go is Carolina.
Yeah.
But I don't think, I mean, look, San Jose worked out that the way to get Erik Karlsson playing like Erik Karlsson was to get rid of Brent Burns.
Yeah.
And now you're going to get Erik Karlsson and put him back with Brent Burns. I don't
understand. I mean, so we'll talk about it soon, but I think it's especially dumb now that, that with the next move that they've made.
The other move that was made. But I think that he'll end up, there was someone else going, I don't think Karlsson will move as well like Hellebuck. No, I think Karlsson will definitely move. I just think they're trying to work out the minutiae of the deal.
Yeah, it's just a matter of what's coming back and what's
retained. I mean, look, apart from the fact that Karlsson really wants to go, and the Sharks, he kept his end of the bargain to the Sharks, and the Sharks kept their end of the bargain to him. And he said, Mike Greer has been in consistent conversation with him. Hasn't just said, we're going to move you anywhere. He basically said to him, because you've got your no move, and because we also want to do right by you, we will consult you completely on where we move you. So you are basically going to guide where we're going.
Yeah, you're going to where you go, and we'll work.
And his thing with the team has been that he also believes the team should get some level of fair value back for him. So they're very much, it's a very good, it's not one of those trades where there's a breakdown. There's no breakdown. The Sharks are just like, we're not going to be in a window to win anytime soon. You need a window to win. We'll work it out. So I think the Penguins move will happen. Partly because he wants it to happen. Partly because Kyle Dubas has been desperate to sign Erik Karlsson for a while.
I suspect it will too. Like, I think that of all of the options, it seems like the most likely one. It's the one that won't die, and it's the one that makes the most sense in terms of like the the window of like competing. I don't know if it makes as much sense for teams that have more than a couple of years, because you're only going to get a couple more good years out of Carlson, and then it's going to become an anchor of a contract, and Pittsburgh doesn't care about that.
No, I think it's a perfect spot. And I also think, interestingly enough, they talk about Kyle Dubas loves his guys, and Kyle Dubas has trade partners. Dubas has dealt with the Sharks a lot. Like, he's dealt with that organization a lot. And he's, even in the last 12 months since Greer's taken over, he's dealt with San Jose a fair bit. San Jose brokered one of the deals for Toronto in last offseason, right? So San Jose has worked with Dubas before.
Yeah,
so there's a really
a lot too.
Yeah, and so there's a really good working relationship there. I'm pretty sure they'll find an agreement that works for everyone. It's just going to take time. But I don't think anyone's particularly rushed about it, as long as it happens before like training camp. I think they're fine.
Yeah.
The other one is
frustrating for me, because every morning I wake up and I check fucking Zitter and try and work out what if it's happened yet.
It's frustrating for me, because I keep waking up and working out what the hell our assets are. I'm looking at a defense next year that's going to be absolute rubbish. Washington Capitals general manager Brian McClellan confirmed to Mike Vogel that forward Evgeny Kuznetsov has requested a trade as well. So Kuznetsov is also trying to move.
Yeah, I don't see that happening as easily, realistically. I don't know what trade value Kuznetsov has at this point in his career.
I don't know who's in for him.
Yeah. So he has 2 years left at $7.8 million. He's a modified no trade, 10-team no trade list. I would imagine that he wants to go to some kind of contender, but like who's got $7.8 million that's willing to take that on?
I'm going to give you the weirdest timeline option. Toronto sends Nylander to Washington for Kuznetsov and moves Tavares to the wing.
I mean, I think that Washington would take that in a second. But
I think Washington would take that in a heartbeat too. I'm not saying it's a good trade for Toronto, but think about it. It's a veteran guy, a winner, a grit guy. He could, he's that guy who knows how to win, and you can move Tavares out to the wing, and you get rid of the problem child who will go to Washington and play on a line. You'd have Ovechkin, Backstrom, and Nylander, and go absolutely mental. It wouldn't surprise me if that's the move. It would be dumb.
Yeah.
It would be really stupid, but Toronto would talk themselves into it.
I think it's just a matter of how much Kuznetsov wants to go. Like, I don't know if he, desperately, obviously, he requested this trade, I think 12 months ago, or whatever. And a lot of the time that happens, it just never eventuates because they can just say no and you've got to play there. But, is he desperate enough that that he's willing to go to Arizona or Chicago or somewhere like that? Because those are the teams that could take him, like Anaheim, basically. Anaheim's still got an insane amount of cap space. But,
can be captain in San Jose.
Yeah, what's the upside there? What's the intention? I don't really know. I suspect that he just kind of stays there realistically.
I'm not gonna put it past Toronto to do something stupid like we'll send you Nylander or bring in the winner in Kuznetsov, and because again culturally they're a broken franchise right now. The Flyers comedically have bought out Tony DeAngelo.
After it was rumored that there was a deal on the table to go to Carolina.
Yeah. 1 year remaining at $5 million. It's now 2 years of buyout at 1.66. This is funny because Tony DeAngelo now has the distinct honor of being the first player in NHL history to be bought out twice.
Yeah.
And everyone went, that can't be true, and went through and had a look. It's true. He is the only player in NHL history bought out twice and then re-signs for the Carolina Hurricanes.
So, I mean, it sounded like that he was pretty much always going there. I don't know, honestly, why Carolina needs him, but they give him 1 year at 1.675, which basically just makes him whole for exactly the amount of money that he loses from the buyout. So it's essentially the trade that originally got nixed because technically they weren't allowed to do it because he'd been traded from them a year ago.
Yeah.
And then they just kind of went, well, screw you, we'll just buy him out and we'll do this. And they could have still done the trade after the year was up. I don't know why it went this way. I don't know why it went to buyout and then signing.
They didn't have to wait that long.
Yeah, it was weird. It was kind of a strange upshot in the end of this, but I just don't understand realistically why, after the success that Carolina had last year with their blue line with Burns and why they brought in D'Angelo to basically undo what they just did. I don't really get it from their perspective.
Not enough right wing podcasting. They wanted more. Not enough people who think the capital invasion was correct. So they just needed to add somebody in who had that bit of grit. So the toughness. We'll transition out of that. And again, there's no transition for this either. Scottsdale Police Department confirmed to the Athletics' Katie Strang, one of the few people still writing about hockey for the Athletic, that Alex Galchenyuk was arrested on the 9th of July on a number of charges, including private property, hit and run, disorderly conduct, failure to obey, resisting arrest, and threatening or intimidating. Now, when they announced that his new contract was terminated by the Coyotes, there were a couple of people in the group who went, see, Coyotes doing Coyotes things. And it's like, no, they're right to terminate him in this situation. And
yeah,
he issued a very public apology, admitted that
he issued one, I think, to like the to the general public and to the police officer,
and then
a separate one for the Coyotes fans.
And then
I do want to say before we mention that though, like at the first, when it was announced before the details were out there, it was interesting because suddenly the contract was terminated, and it was this very kind of questionable thing of like, well, why can they terminate in this instance and not all these other ones? Like, there were all these other recent things that had happened that the contracts weren't terminated and so forth. And I think that there's still the potential that this could be, brought up with the PA as a... The
PA's already sort of flagged they're not particularly... They looked into it.
Yeah, I think it went a bit quiet after the details of what actually happened came out.
The PA initially
started to hear that basically he threatened to, have the police officer and his family killed and all these, awful things that was going to happen. But from his Russian connections, all this kind of stuff. I think that sympathy for Galchenyuk went away pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, he's issued the apologies. He's checked himself into the player assistance program. And I think, look, especially after the last couple of years, you can only hope that he gets the help that he needs. Like he just started at one point to put his career back on track. That little run he had in Toronto was really good. Then he seemed to chase the money again, and he sort of bounced around and had never stuck anywhere. And it's just it's a shame to see what sort of has happened. Now, moving off that, the Vegas Golden Knights named Dominic Ducharme and Joel Ward as assistant coaches on Bruce Cassidy's staff, because Bruce Cassidy has no doubt decided to play in hard mode with Ducharme on the bench. So Jack Eichel will be rested consistently, just whenever he looks like he's going to score some points. Maybe they'll send him down. I believe Ducharme is working out if the Golden Knights have a relationship with Laval. Because he'd very much like to send Eichel down to the Rocket just when he's starting to hit his form. Good to see Joel Ward getting a job behind a bench.
Yeah, I think that's the notable thing here. Realistically, is Joel Ward first. I think it's his first actual NHL coaching gig.
Look, again, obviously, I have a very big soft spot for Joel Ward. But again, I think it was Joel Ward, and then it was somebody hired Dominic Ducharme.
Yeah, that was a bit weird. It's one of these things that's not like the other.
The Cup winners hired Dominic Ducharme again.
Yeah,
Cassidy's trying hard mode. That's all I can think of.
So I think the thing to remember with coaching staff is that there's a lot of kind of support positions. People that are just responsible for the forwards, just responsible for defense, just responsible power play, penalty kill, all that kind of shit.
Sandwiches,
video coaches, all this kind of shit. So I don't know exactly what the role is going to be for Ducharme. Maybe he has some particular talents that it doesn't lead towards being a head coach necessarily. But I have no doubt that for Tim to get to that position, he must have the ability to do something particularly well with that.
Is he friends with Phil Kessel? Because that gets you the head coaching job in
Yeah,
Vancouver eventually.
that does work out pretty well.
Eventually,
maybe they're going to extend Phil Kessel now.
yeah. Eventually, if you can talk to Phil Kessel, eventually they hire you in Vancouver as head coach. That's how that works. In very specific Sharks related news, the Barracuda, the San Jose Sharks AHL team, have had a bit of a weird one. So Martin Kaut, who obviously was traded from Colorado to San Jose last year, found himself playing on the Barracuda. Now, at the end of the year, his contract wasn't renewed. He's gone back over to the Czech Republic, or to Czechia. Let's get the country right now, because it's now Czechia. And he told the Czech press in an interview that the San Jose the Barracuda coaches tried to force him to fight in every game. It's a really weird one, this one. So his comments were, in the translation, it was like, he'd had three concussions and 2 shoulder injuries from 2018. If I'd fight, I would have been injured. It really bothered me. I'd fight. He forces me into fights anyway. It bothered me. I'd fight for a good reason, but none of that. When a game is sold out, it escalates when you defend a teammate. But fighting just because like that, I'm supposed to be on the ice to score goals. It also talked about the fact that they said that they specifically picked other Czech players and wanted to make him fight other Czech players. The whole thing, again, it might very well be true. The Barracuda has come out and gone, what? Others around the organization have come out and gone, what? I'm a bit concerned about the path that some of San Jose is taking at the moment, because they seem to be going, we're going to get bruising, we're going to be that big-bodied again, we're going to hit you hard. I don't believe that the Barracuda would have sent Martin Kaut out to fight, first of all, because it's just a dumb choice of someone if you're going to send someone out to fight every night. To me, it screams more player that felt like they were much better than San Jose in general, didn't get a contract from San Jose, and needs to justify why they decided to not go back and go, oh, yeah, no, they wanted to make me fight every night.
Yeah, I think it's maybe
saving face in the local press.
Yeah, for sure. I think there might be some element of truth to it. It might not be like they wanted me to fight every night, but like there's probably some feeling from him that's like, they wanted me to play a certain way that I didn't want to play. They wanted, that my game is like this or whatever, and I didn't want to do the things that they wanted me to do. Probably they told him to do certain things to try to kind of teach him stuff, and he didn't want to do it or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. But so like, what he said was
probably a nugget of something in that.
What he said was that an unnamed Barracuda, and this is the other thing too, an unnamed Barracuda coach would choose an opponent, usually a fellow Czech-born player, before each game for him to fight. And when he refused, he said the coach said that that's why he wasn't currently playing in the NHL. So it feels a little bit like a face-saving exercise from Kaut and going, because again, name the coach.
Yeah.
Really simple. Really simple. Weird. Who said it?
Yeah. I mean, if that's actually happening, that's very weird. And
if that's actually happening, fire the entire Barracuda coaching staff.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, can I just point out the Barracuda were like millimeters away from a playoff run. Like they weren't a beat you up crappy team. The Barracuda were fairly decent. So I find the whole thing rather fanciful. But who knows? And again, if it came out that it was true, fire the coaching staff.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, so question and answers to finish off. So we got some questions and answers. I'm ignoring the one about will there be a poll for the Extra Shift co-host of the year. That's not going to be an award. That's not going to be a thing. There was also one about whose team is more embarrassing. Thank you, Shannon. It was mine or yours, Brendon. Mine's the answer. So I do like this one from Anthony, though. If you could go back in time and change one thing in A, your team's history, B, NHL history, what would it be?
So, I mean, I think I know what yours is, but
I don't think you do.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'll let you know. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is just basically the concussion history of Sidney Crosby. I think that's if I want to look at it from like a Penguins perspective, I think I forgot how to say the word Penguins for a second there. I became Benedict Cumberbatch and said Penguin. But I think that's the real the real what if is like if he'd never been injured during that real kind of peak of his career, real kind of like top of Sidney Crosby's game. What potential stats could he have put up? What potential records could he have broken? All that kind of stuff. He basically missed like almost 2 years worth. I think he missed about a year's worth of games in like a 2-year period, and it just kind of really just put this huge question mark over what his legacy could have been. He's already, potentially going to be, one of the greatest players of all time, but that missing section of his his peak, basically, like, the kind of age that like Connor McDavid is now, in the last couple of years, basically, the last 2 years of Connor McDavid's career where he's put up these like record-breaking kind of, numbers, that's kind of the period of Sidney Crosby that we lost.
So the thing from my team that I would change is I would change. Now, you think I'm going to say 2016.
No, I was just going to say, like, more specifically, like winning a cup, but like
winning a cup. But I would pick a year.
Okay, all right.
I would change the conference final result against the Blackhawks in 2010.
Okay, yeah.
Because that San Jose team would have won a cup.
Yeah, okay.
The 2010 San Jose Sharks, if they had gotten past the Blackhawks, would have won the cup. I wouldn't change the 2016 one because I don't think that team was necessarily good enough.
No. I mean, I was just kind of thinking more generally, just in terms of
I'd give them a cup.
The
but
success
I think
that San Jose had,
the one that I would give them in particular is 2010. That 2010 San Jose Sharks team finished the regular season 51, 20, and 11. Like, I would give that team a run at the cup because I think that team wins the final. And that was the thing. Like, if you go back and look at that year, for example, everyone sort of said before that series, whoever wins out of San Jose and Chicago is the favorites for the cup. It was, and look, that was part of that run where San Jose bumped into Chicago, Vancouver, LA, Chicago, but they just ran into everyone. And like 2016, realistically, if you go back and look at 2016, we shouldn't have been anywhere near it in 2016. Like, Logan Couture had an amazing playoffs, got us there, and then got injured at the start of the final series. So we were screwed by that point. Once Couture was injured, we were done. But that team wasn't anywhere near as deep as that 2010 team had everything. And that's
is there anything more generally in like NHL history, maybe not about?
So the general NHL history is a bit of a tricky one. But I'm also going to go, like, my general history one is also, so I've got two. One is specific to a player and one is specific to an event. The player one is I would take away all of Mario Lemieux's injuries. Because I think the sport would be bigger in America if you had been able to market Gretzky versus Lemieux and both of them fully fit and firing and scoring and just being
what he did while fighting cancer is insane.
Like, that's the thing. I would take away all of the time that Lemieux missed and just have Lemieux and Gretzky, and then even the Gretzky trade happens and you've got the two biggest stars in the sport both in the United States. They would be wall-to-wall coverage. And look, Gretzky on his own was wall-to-wall coverage. You put both of them playing at the peak of their powers, battling for every NHL record under the sun, and both of them chasing the NHL scoring record at the same time. Like, look at what it did with baseball, like in the steroid era when you had McGuire and Sosa and all that chasing the record against each other. It was wall-to-wall coverage. So I think that I would change. The other thing I would change, and again, funny enough, changing this would mean that the San Jose Sharks probably wouldn't exist. I would change the way that the merger was done between the WHA and the NHL.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the WHA got shafted, right? Remember, the Winnipeg Jets in the WHA, and we talked about this as a whole podcast on the WHA from a couple of off seasons ago. The Winnipeg Jets, who won the Avco Cup in the last 2 seasons, would have made at least a conference final, if not won a Stanley Cup. And the deal when they all came into the league was that all of the WHA teams could keep a couple of players only. And their rosters then had to go up for an open draft. So the Jets team that was Avco Cup winners and were an absolute force on the ice were splintered. Also, a bunch of teams were folded. The Houston Aeros were folded. They folded a bunch of teams. Some of them couldn't stand on their own. But the Aeros, for example, could have, and you had Gordie Howe still playing at this point in time. So Gordie Howe and the Aeros could have come in, and you'd have the Houston market locked up. You would have had, again, Winnipeg team, though, if you've not ever heard anything about the original WHA Winnipeg Jets, go and look it up. Go read the book of Rebel League, which is all about the WHA, which is where we talked about in our other podcast. But I would change the conditions of the merger because I think you would actually have ended up with a stronger league out of it. And I think you would have ended up with a much more marketable series of sort of battles with, again, the Oilers became a juggernaut. But part of the reason the Oilers became a juggernaut was they picked at the Winnipeg Jets because they both came over in the WHA and Pocklington just had bigger pockets.
Yeah.
So he could throw money at people because you could.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting what ifs in terms of certain points in NHL history, and it's not even really specific. Like, obviously, there's a lot that could, domino after that, and we don't know exactly what the results were. But I do wonder occasionally about certain things, like rule changes, like when they rolled back some of the rule changes that allowed clutch and grabbing a little bit back again, or that kind of thing. Like when they immediately kind of opened things up and everything was great, everyone was scoring, was high flying, whatever, and they went, oh god, and they kind of like rolled it back a bit. If they'd had the balls to kind of stick with it and all that kind of, some of those question marks of like where could the game be now, that things that we're seeing finally in terms of the level of talent and skill with some of the new players and all that kind of things. Could we have had that 10 years ago, and then where would we have been now? All that kind of there's a lot of what ifs, and obviously there's no guarantees on any of that. It's just a theoretical thought exchange, but that's where my mind goes.
Well, no, but that's why my thing with the Sharks is not 2016. My thing with the Sharks is 2010, because I want to see that 2010 team play for a cup.
Yeah,
because I think they would have won. All right. Shannon's I'm going to ask one of the questions because we answered the other one, which was about renaming the Selkie.
Yeah.
He basically says, will Pierre-Luc Dubois redeem himself? I'm of the opinion that, so here's my thing. I don't think he needs to redeem himself, but I think he's overhyped. I think
he just needs to shut up, to be honest. Like, I think that he's, so the other half of that question was, will he become Galchenyuk 2.0? I think at this point in his career, he's already exceeded Galchenyuk. Like, he has 3 60-point plus seasons, which Galchenyuk never got to.
No.
Obviously, I can see the comparison in terms of like the potential of this guy who was supposed to be a star and never potentially made it. But I think that's the reality with a lot of highly touted NHL players. Not everyone becomes a point per game guy, and being a 60-point center, top 6 center, is realistically essentially what PLD is. And I think if he just quietly didn't say anything, didn't request trades or whatever for the next few years, I think that would all just kind of quietly get forgotten about, and he would just kind of be thought about as any other second line center in the league.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I don't think he has to redeem himself for anything. I don't think he's, a lot of people that a couple of times have tried to christen him as like a second coming of a great superstar. No, he's a very good, can get you some good points player. But I agree with you. I think his biggest thing is not that he needs to redeem himself. I think he just needs to shut his mouth and play some hockey. Like, just don't talk anymore. Just play hockey. I mean, the good news with his contract now is that he's tied up and he can't go anywhere. And I know he likes to try to get out of those contracts every now and then, but this time he's tied up and he signed that deal and LA will not let him go. So,
I mean, I hope he's happy there. If
he wakes up tomorrow morning and decides he wants to go back to Montreal, that's not an option.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, look, I don't know what he's like as a person. I don't know if he's insufferable or an awful, person or anything like that. I hope that he's a nice guy and he finds a place that he fits in and just, quietly has a good career. If he just continues to put up a 60-point pace or whatever, I think that's probably a win for him.
Now, that'll do us for this. Now, we are going to still have content through the offseason. what we're going to do is we're going to do little bits and pieces. We've got little things we do. We do some trade specials where we mock up general managers and do that. We also tend to go through some other hockey media. Like again, I mentioned before, we did the WHA stuff. We went back and reviewed the King's Ransom ESPN 30 for 30 and looked at that. We've done redrafts. There's been a few redrafts done lately, so we might do another one of those. But what we're going to start with in the first episode of our off-season coverage, and this is setting everybody homework. So what I want you to do is I want you to, and everyone knows now. Everyone knows, especially on the group already, everyone is very aware that I spend a lot of time telling everyone not to pirate stuff. This is not pirating, however, because this is perfectly legal, and B, knowing my contacts at CBC, they get ratings when you do this. So they're quite happy for you to do it. Using a VPN, go to CBC Gem, set yourself to Canada, go to CBC Gem, that's their streaming platform, and watch the documentary. Jason Priestley made it, Offside, the Harold Ballard story. Now, I've already watched this a few times. I don't think Brendon has got to it yet, however.
I haven't yet. It's on my list.
It is, if you want to understand why the Leafs are a dysfunctional circus, this documentary explains how they went from being the class of the league, winning consistent cups, to an absolute laughing stock. And like through, and I'm not saying that, frivolously and making fun of Leafs fans. Leafs fans will tell you the Harold Ballard years are absolutely mental. And like Ballard stories,
insane stories.
If you listen to Ballard stories, you would not believe that half of them are true, except he's the one telling you half of them. And he's not exaggerating.
No.
The Ballard stories, just to give you an idea of like one area of how Harold Ballard's life, after he became the sole owner, and that's a whole saga of its own, the way that he basically kicked Conn Smythe out of his own team. He eventually moved into Maple Leaf Gardens. He had an apartment built and basically moved in and walked around and was just in the building at all times and would frequently be the security guard who turned the lights off. He'd go down to concessions and get himself a snack. They said if you were in the building at any time, Harold could just appear. And this is a guy who was a multi-millionaire who was living like a pauper in Maple Leaf Gardens. It's just unbelievable. So that's your homework before the next episode. Offside, the Harold Ballard story on CBC Gem. Go and watch it. You will not, even if you're not a fan of the Leafs, go and watch it. You will not be disappointed. It's one of the best. Again, Jason Priestley made the documentary. It's unbelievable. Like genuinely, Harold Ballard stories are mental. So that's going to do us for this one. So thank you, everyone, for watching, listening on Catch Up, however you've happened to take this in. We really appreciate all of it. So we will catch you in a little bit of time. We're just going to sort of periodically put stuff up now. So, up in the off season. So enjoy your off season, and we'll catch you all later.
See ya.